Darren Sharper is remembered as one of the greatest safeties of his generation. A name that, for over a decade, was synonymous with defensive excellence in the NFL. With 63 career interceptions, Sharper ranks 6th in league history in that category. Of those, 11 were returned for touchdowns, placing him among the best at turning defense into points. A 5-time Pro Bowl selection, 2-time All-Pro, and named to the NFL 2000's All-Decade Team. A Super Bowl champion with the New Orleans Saints, accused of sexual assaults in 4 states involving 16 women, and sentenced to 18 years in prison after a plea deal. A striking contrast between a hero on the field and a criminal off it. Darren Sharper. If you followed the NFL in the 2000s, it's impossible not to remember that name. He was the kind of player who, with one move, could completely change the outcome of a game. As a safety, his ability to read opponents' plays and anticipate what was coming next placed him among the greatest of all time. A true defensive maestro. It wasn't just about defending, he knew exactly how to turn defense into points, something very few safeties can do with such precision. But how did Darren Sharper get to this point? How did he become one of the most feared names by quarterbacks? The answer lies in his early days in the NFL. In 1997, Darren was drafted by the Green Bay Packers in the 2nd round. And right from the start, it was clear that the team had made a smart choice. He quickly showed that he was more than just a promising rookie. On the field, he seemed to have an internal radar, always knowing where the ball would be and what the opposing quarterback was about to do. In his early years with the Packers, Sharper already showed signs of becoming a legend. His ability to read the game was unmatched. While many defenders would just try to stop the opponent's advance, Sharper was always ready to pounce, intercepting passes and returning the ball to his team. This made him a fundamental piece of the Packers' defense, especially in seasons where the team was fighting for playoff spots. But for Darren, being good wasn't enough. He wanted to be the best. And that pursuit of excellence led him to study the game almost obsessively. He spent hours watching film of opposing quarterbacks, analyzing their movements, studying their tendencies, and trying to find any weakness he could exploit. He knew that to be the best, he needed to be one step ahead of everyone else. And that's exactly what he did. During his 7 seasons with the Packers, Sharper racked up interceptions that changed the outcome of several key games. And it wasn't just that, he was a true leader on the field. Even as a defensive player, his impact went beyond the defensive side of the ball. He inspired his teammates, mentored the younger players, and was always there when the team needed him most. With every season, his name gained more prominence. With every game, he made it clear that he was one of the NFL's greats. In 2005, Sharper made the decision to move on, seeking new challenges with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, if you think he had already reached the pinnacle of his career in Green Bay, you're about to see that he had much more to show. With the Vikings, he cemented his status as one of the most dominant safeties in the league. If he had already shown his talent in Green Bay, in Minnesota he took his game to an even higher level. One of the most remarkable games during his time with the Vikings happened in an electrifying match against the Chicago Bears. It was a crucial contest, and the Vikings needed a win to keep their playoff hopes alive. The game was tight, and the Bears were about to take the lead in the final quarter. That's when Sharper did what he did best, read the play before the quarterback even finished his throwing motion. He anticipated the pass, intercepted the ball, and ran nearly 50 yards, securing the touchdown that would seal the Vikings' victory. The play wasn't just a defensive masterstroke, it symbolized Sharper's immediate impact on the team and how, in high-pressure moments, he could pull off the unexpected. That wasn't the only time Sharper shined in clutch moments. He was known for his ability to step up in the final minutes when the game was on the line. Throughout his 4 seasons with the Vikings, he made several interceptions in high-stakes situations, always bringing the defense to the forefront of victory. His teammates knew that if there was a chance to turn the game around, Sharper would be there to make it happen. Besides his natural skills, Sharper had something that set him apart even more: durability. In a sport as physical as football, where injuries are constant and can end a player's career in the blink of an eye, Sharper managed to stay healthy and in top form for almost his entire career. He missed very few games, which is remarkable for a player who was always in the thick of the action. This durability allowed him to play over 200 games in his career, a feat that few defenders can achieve. And just when you thought Darren Sharper had shown everything he could, along came 2009. That was the year he signed with the New Orleans Saints, and what happened next only solidified his legacy. Sharper wasn't just a key player for the Saints defense, he was one of the reasons they won their first Super Bowl. Yes, Darren Sharper, in his third NFL team, was one of the essential pieces of the defense that helped the Saints win Super Bowl 44. During the 2009 season, Sharper made 9 interceptions. And, of course, 3 of them were returned for touchdowns. He showed the world that, even after more than a decade of playing at a high level, he still had a lot to offer. The Saints' defense was crucial to the team's success, and Sharper was at the center of it all. His leadership, his game sense, and his ability to make clutch plays were the difference makers that led New Orleans to the top of the NFL. After the Super Bowl victory, Sharper had achieved what every player dreams of. He was a Super Bowl champion. But for Sharper, this was just another milestone in a career filled with achievements. Over 14 years in the NFL, he didn't just rack up impressive numbers, he transformed the role of a safety and showed that with talent and dedication, it's possible to dominate the game in a way that few can. However, while Sharper was shining on the field, a much darker story was unfolding off it. His impressive stats, his leadership, and his accomplishments would only be part of his legacy. What was coming next would shake not only his career but his entire life. Darren Sharper's brilliance on the field was undeniable, but as his career was reaching its peak, a much darker chapter was beginning to unfold behind the scenes. While fans celebrated his interceptions and game-changing plays, authorities in multiple states were beginning to piece together a chilling pattern of behavior off the field. The first allegations surfaced quietly, without the media storm that would eventually follow. Sharper was accused of drugging and sexually assaulting women, often using his status as a high-profile athlete to shield himself from scrutiny. Over time, what began as whispers grew into a nationwide investigation spanning multiple states: California, Arizona, Nevada, and Louisiana. The allegations painted a horrifying picture of a man leading a double life, a beloved sports icon by day, and a predator by night. Sharper's method was calculated. He would allegedly meet women at nightclubs or parties, offer them drinks laced with powerful sedatives, and wait until they lost consciousness to assault them. The accusations mounted as more victims came forward, and soon, Sharper found himself at the center of one of the most disturbing criminal cases in sports history. Despite the gravity of the accusations, it took time for law enforcement to fully connect the dots. Multiple investigations were launched, and as evidence began to pile up, the full extent of Sharper's actions came to light. He was linked to at least 16 victims across 4 states, each recounting eerily similar experiences. What made the case even more shocking was the contrast between Sharper's public persona, the charismatic, successful athlete, and the horrific crimes of which he was being accused. In 2016, Sharper was sentenced to 18 years in prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of sexual assault. His conviction marked the end of a long and painful legal process that had left many questioning how such a figure could evade justice for so long. It was a staggering fall from grace, as the man who once stood atop the NFL's defensive elite was now branded a serial predator. The aftermath of his conviction sent shockwaves through the NFL. For years, the league had struggled to address the off-field behavior of its players, but the Sharper case was different. It wasn't just about an isolated incident or a minor infraction. It was a multi-state criminal enterprise, and it forced the NFL to confront its own failures in holding players accountable. Sharper's name, once synonymous with greatness, became forever tied to one of the darkest scandals in sports history. The Darren Sharper scandal didn't just disrupt his life, it forced the NFL to confront its most uncomfortable truths. The league, long regarded as one of the most successful sports organizations in the world, now faced intense public scrutiny over its handling of off-field conduct. For years, the NFL had been criticized for inconsistent discipline and, in some cases, seemingly turning a blind eye to the actions of its star players. Sharper's case was the breaking point, raising urgent questions about the league's ability, or willingness, to hold its athletes accountable. Sharper's crimes were not isolated incidents but part of a horrifying pattern that stretched across multiple states. This wasn't just one player making a mistake. It was a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and privilege in sports. As more details emerged, the public's trust in the NFL began to erode. Fans, media outlets, and even sponsors demanded answers. How could someone with a history of such heinous acts continue playing at the highest level, moving from team to team, with no intervention from the league? The NFL's failure to act sooner on Sharper's off-field behavior became a glaring symbol of the league's outdated and ineffective approach to player discipline. The situation worsened as the media coverage intensified. Major news networks, sports talk shows, and even late-night comedians criticized the NFL's seemingly lax approach to player misconduct. The hashtag NFL2 started trending on social media, drawing parallels between the league's response to Sharper and broader societal issues about accountability and privilege. This relentless media pressure turned what might have been an isolated scandal into a crisis that threatened to undermine the entire organization's reputation. Every new revelation about Sharper's crimes put the NFL back in the spotlight, with fans and analysts questioning whether the league was truly committed to addressing the deeper issues. The NFL's relationships with its sponsors also began to strain under the weight of the scandal. Corporate partners, including major brands like Nike and Pepsi, were growing increasingly concerned about the negative association with the league. There were whispers that some companies were considering pulling their sponsorships if the NFL didn't act decisively to restore public trust. This financial pressure further complicated the situation, as the NFL was not only facing a public relations crisis but also the potential loss of lucrative partnerships that helped fuel the league's global reach. Faced with mounting pressure, both from the media and corporate sponsors, the NFL recognized the need for immediate and drastic reform. Commissioner Roger Goodell took the lead, announcing a complete overhaul of the league's personal conduct policy. The goal was clear: the NFL needed a unified, consistent approach to handling player misconduct, one that would ensure accountability and restore the public's trust in the integrity of the league. Before Sharper, the NFL's personal conduct policy had been vague and unevenly enforced. Teams were largely responsible for disciplining their own players, and without a uniform standard, some infractions were swept under the rug or met with minimal punishment. The decentralized system allowed star players to escape with little more than a slap on the wrist, especially when their on-field performance overshadowed their off-field behavior. In some cases, players continued to play despite serious allegations, and the league seemed reluctant to step in unless public pressure mounted. This laissez-faire attitude had allowed several high-profile cases of misconduct to slip through the cracks. Players had been accused of crimes ranging from domestic violence to drug-related offenses, but unless the media or public outrage became too loud to ignore, many received light or no punishment at all. The Darren Sharper scandal, however, left the NFL with no choice but to act decisively. It was clear that a more robust and centralized approach to player conduct was needed. In response, Commissioner Roger Goodell announced a series of sweeping reforms to the league's personal conduct policy, signaling that the NFL was prepared to take a much tougher stance on player misconduct. Under these new guidelines, the NFL took on a more active role in disciplining players, rather than leaving it to individual teams. This was a fundamental shift in how the league handled off-field behavior. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of automatic suspensions for players involved in serious criminal allegations, even before legal proceedings had been completed. The message was clear: the NFL would no longer wait for the courts to decide before taking action. If credible allegations were made, the league had the authority to suspend players immediately, sending a strong message that misconduct would not be tolerated, regardless of a player's star power. This was no small adjustment. Teams had to quickly adapt to the possibility of losing key players in the midst of a season, knowing that a single off-field incident could lead to a suspension without the chance to appeal until the legal system had taken its course. Some coaches expressed frustration, feeling that the league's new stance was too quick to punish, but the NFL's priority was clear: public trust needed to be restored. Under the revamped policy, penalties became far more severe. Players involved in domestic violence, sexual misconduct, or other serious crimes faced lengthy suspensions, fines, and, in some cases, lifetime bans from the league. Repeat offenders were treated with even less leniency, with the potential for permanent expulsion. This marked a dramatic shift from the previous system, where players often received only a few games of suspension for serious infractions, if any punishment at all. To further demonstrate its commitment to change, the NFL brought in external experts to help guide the reform process. Lawyers, criminologists, and even advocacy groups were consulted to ensure that the new policy was as comprehensive as possible. This collaboration not only bolstered the credibility of the new reforms but also provided the NFL with a framework to address a wide range of behavioral issues. The league worked closely with organizations that specialized in domestic violence prevention and sexual assault awareness, establishing partnerships that would help implement educational programs for players and staff alike. But the NFL wasn't just focused on punishment. The league recognized that reactive measures alone wouldn't be enough to prevent future scandals. It needed to be proactive. As part of the new reforms, the NFL introduced mandatory education and training programs for all players and staff. These programs covered a range of topics, including domestic violence prevention, sexual assault awareness, substance abuse, and mental health. The goal was to educate players about the gravity of their actions and the impact they had on their careers, the league, and the public image of professional football. These programs were rolled out league-wide, with the aim of fostering a culture of responsibility and respect both on and off the field. Players were required to attend workshops and seminars, participate in group discussions, and engage in role-playing scenarios to better understand the consequences of their behavior. The league also introduced partnerships with advocacy groups and professionals who specialized in violence prevention and counseling, ensuring that the training went beyond mere box-ticking exercises. This was a clear effort to shift the culture of the NFL, promoting not just athletic excellence, but personal integrity. While these reforms were largely welcomed, they were not without controversy. Critics, including some players and analysts, argued that the new policies were too harsh and risked punishing players before they had their day in court. They questioned whether the NFL was overreaching by imposing suspensions before legal judgments were made, effectively acting as judge, jury, and executioner. Some felt that the league was succumbing to public pressure and making an example out of players to save face, rather than pursuing genuine reform. The implementation of independent investigations was one of the pillars of the NFL's reforms following the Darren scandal. For years, investigations into player misconduct were conducted internally by the teams themselves or the league, often without sufficient rigor or transparency. This created mistrust among fans, the media, and even the players, who saw a lack of clarity in disciplinary decisions. The Sharper case exposed these flaws, revealing how the absence of impartial investigations allowed criminal behavior to continue without consequences for far too long. Public pressure and growing media coverage forced the NFL to completely rethink its investigative process. It was no longer acceptable to rely on internal investigations when allegations of serious crimes, such as sexual assault, violence, or drug use, were involved. The league's credibility was at stake, and to rebuild public trust, the NFL made a radical decision: all investigations into off-field misconduct would be conducted by independent committees made up of external experts. These committees were composed of former prosecutors, FBI agents, and consultants specializing in domestic violence and sexual crimes. The goal was to ensure that any investigation followed rigorous, impartial protocols, providing a level of transparency that had previously been missing. The NFL could no longer afford to let the public believe that star players were above the law or that their infractions were treated lightly because of their status. This independent approach also meant that investigations would be faster and more thorough. In the past, the league often waited for legal proceedings to unfold before taking action, which led to long delays and, in some cases, a sense of impunity. Now, with dedicated teams analyzing these cases, the NFL was able to act preventively even before a court ruled on a player's guilt or innocence. This led to the implementation of preventive punishments, such as temporary suspensions or removal from the team while investigations were ongoing. Although controversial, this measure was seen as necessary to protect the league's image. The punishments also became much stricter and more standardized. Instead of allowing teams to decide on a case-by-case basis, the league centralized the application of severe penalties for all players who violated the new personal conduct policy. Serious crimes, such as domestic violence or sexual assault, resulted in suspensions of at least 6 games, even if the player had not been formally convicted by the judicial system. In cases where players were repeat offenders, the punishments could include a suspension for the entire season or even permanent expulsion from the league. These changes were met with mixed reactions. On the one hand, there was a consensus that the NFL needed to tighten its control over players to prevent future scandals. Fans wanted to see a more responsible league, and the media supported the measures as a necessary step toward restoring the integrity of football. On the other hand, some players and legal experts questioned whether the league was being fair by acting before a legal trial. They argued that these preventive punishments could damage players' careers and lives, who might eventually be acquitted in court. However, the NFL justified these measures as necessary to maintain public trust and protect the sport's reputation. The league emphasized that the fact that a player was being prosecuted, even without a final conviction, was enough to tarnish the organization's image. Thus, preventive punishments were seen as a way to protect the integrity of the sport while allowing the legal process to run its course. The independent commission, in turn, was responsible for ensuring that investigations were conducted fairly and with solid evidence, minimizing the risk of unjust disciplinary actions. In addition, the NFL implemented an automatic review system for all misconduct cases. This meant that, at the end of any investigation, the decision to punish or not the player would go through an additional review to ensure that all procedures had been correctly followed. This review process involved not only the investigative team but also legal experts and leaders of human rights organizations. This extra layer of oversight helped lend more legitimacy to the process, dispelling accusations that punishments were arbitrary or politically motivated. This combination of independent investigations and strict punishments marked a profound transformation in how the NFL handled off-field misconduct. While there were challenges and criticisms, the league committed itself to ensuring that past mistakes would not be repeated. Players, coaches, and even team owners now knew that the NFL was willing to act firmly and immediately, protecting both its image and the values of the sport. Still, the implementation of these measures raised an important question: could the NFL balance justice with speed? Many feared that quick investigations might sacrifice accuracy in the rush to respond to public pressure. Over time, that doubt would remain, but the league was determined to show that it was willing to do whatever was necessary to restore the lost trust. In addition to disciplinary reforms, the NFL recognized that cultural change couldn't be achieved through punishment alone. To prevent future scandals like the Darren Sharper case, the league realized it needed to invest in education and awareness programs. The goal was to address the root of the problem, ensuring that players, coaches, and staff fully understood the consequences of their off-field actions and the responsibilities that came with being public figures and role models. These programs became a central part of the reforms, focusing on 3 main areas: domestic violence, sexual harassment and assault, and substance abuse. These were recurring issues that had plagued the NFL's image for years, and the league knew that simply penalizing players after the fact wasn't enough. They needed to educate them and equip them with the tools necessary to recognize, avoid, and handle these situations responsibly. The NFL launched a series of mandatory workshops that all players and coaches were required to attend. During the preseason, teams received visits from domestic violence experts, criminologists, and human rights attorneys to conduct educational sessions. In these sessions, players were encouraged to share their experiences and discuss the impact of destructive behaviors on their lives, their families, and the community at large. One of the main points of discussion was the long-term impact of off-field behavior, and how it could not only destroy careers but also cause irreparable harm to victims and society. These workshops were highly interactive. They included simulations and role-playing, where players and coaches could put themselves in the shoes of victims of violence or harassment. This hands-on approach helped break down barriers and create a deeper awareness of the severity of situations that were often trivialized or overlooked. During these exercises, psychologists and human behavior specialists guided discussions, addressing the pressures athletes face and how those pressures can contribute to impulsive and destructive behaviors. Another key focus was the prevention of substance abuse. Given the history of drug-related scandals in the NFL, the league recognized that many players turned to substance use to cope with physical pain, stress, or performance pressure. Specific programs were implemented to address this problem, emphasizing not only educating players about the dangers of drug use but also providing support options for those in need of help. Players were encouraged to seek assistance before reaching a breaking point, and the league established a confidential support system, allowing athletes to seek counseling without fear of public shame or reprisal. Beyond education about violence and substance use, the NFL began to heavily invest in psychological support and counseling for players. The highly competitive environment of professional football creates an unusual level of stress, and many players struggle to balance the demands of their careers with their personal lives. With this in mind, the league formed partnerships with mental health organizations and instituted counseling programs that were now available to all players and staff. This psychological support wasn't just seen as a tool to prevent harmful behaviors but also as a way to help players manage the inevitable pressures of their careers, from performance anxiety to the fear of injury and the impact of retirement. The counseling programs were designed to address issues such as anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and the transition to life after sports. Rather than waiting for players to reach a point of crisis, the goal was to provide resources before the situation spiraled out of control. These programs included regular check-in sessions, where mental health professionals could monitor players' well-being. Support groups were also created so athletes could share their experiences and find solidarity with peers facing similar challenges. The NFL also sought to raise awareness about the importance of healthy relationships and responsible behavior off the field. The focus wasn't just on avoiding infractions but on cultivating a culture of respect and integrity. Players, who are often seen as role models, particularly by young people, were encouraged to lead by example, promoting a culture of mutual respect, empathy, and social responsibility. The NFL also encouraged athletes to engage in public awareness campaigns, reinforcing their responsibilities as public figures and using their platform to promote positive messages about equality, respect, and the fight against violence. These efforts were widely praised by human rights organizations and by the players' families themselves. However, the success of these programs would be measured over time. There was still skepticism about whether these initiatives could truly change a deeply ingrained culture and whether new generations of players would adopt this preventive mindset. Nevertheless, the NFL demonstrated that it was willing to go beyond punishments and suspensions to address the problem at its root. By investing in education, training, and psychological support, the league hoped to create a healthier environment where players would not only avoid destructive behaviors but also find the resources they needed to thrive both on and off the field. The lingering question was, would these reforms be enough to prevent future scandals? And, more importantly, how would the NFL's culture truly transform in the years to come? This question leads us to another crucial aspect, the lasting impact on NFL culture and the implementation of long-term reforms that would shape the future of the league in profound ways. As the dust began to settle following the Darren scandal and the sweeping reforms that followed, it became clear that the NFL was entering a new era. The league had been forced to confront its shortcomings, and the changes that emerged reshaped its cultural foundation. One of the most significant shifts was the heightened sense of accountability now expected of players, coaches, and staff. No longer was it enough for athletes to simply perform on the field, their behavior off the field was now under intense scrutiny, and the league had made it clear that violations of the new personal conduct policy would be met with swift and severe consequences. The cultural impact of these reforms was felt almost immediately. Players became more aware of their actions and the potential repercussions. The once unspoken rule that star players could escape consequences because of their value to the team was now being dismantled. The NFL's new standards require that all players, regardless of their status or performance, be held accountable for their behavior, both publicly and privately. This shift in expectations marked a turning point in the league's history, with players being reminded that they represented not only their teams but also the NFL as a whole. One of the most notable changes was how team cultures themselves evolved. Coaches and front office staff became more involved in ensuring that players understood the importance of responsible behavior. Many teams started implementing their own internal guidelines, complementing the league's overarching reforms. Workshops, mentoring programs, and increased dialogue around ethical behavior became part of regular team meetings. Some teams even hired dedicated professionals, psychologists, social workers, and legal advisors, to help athletes navigate both their personal and professional challenges, ensuring they had the support needed to avoid destructive behaviors. This cultural shift wasn't limited to players and teams. The NFL's leadership also faced a new level of accountability. The league was now more transparent about its decision-making processes regarding disciplinary actions. For years, critics had accused the NFL of operating behind closed doors, with opaque rules and inconsistent punishments. With the introduction of independent investigations and the automatic review process, the league aimed to remove the perception of bias and secrecy. Fans, players, and even the media could now see that disciplinary actions were based on thorough investigations and were applied consistently across the board. The lasting impact of these reforms is also evident in how the NFL deals with future cases of misconduct. When new incidents arise, the league now moves more quickly to investigate and take action. There is less hesitation, as the NFL has established a framework that allows for preventive measures to be implemented, even while legal cases are still in progress. This proactive approach has helped rebuild trust in the NFL's ability to police itself, though challenges still remain. These changes also extended to public perception. Fans, once frustrated by what they saw as the NFL's lenient approach to misconduct, began to see the league taking a harder stance on issues that were once overlooked or dismissed. Although the NFL had faced a significant crisis of image in the wake of the Sharper case, its reforms gradually restored some of the trust that had been lost. Sponsors, too, took note. Companies that had once considered pulling their financial support from the league began to see the NFL as a more responsible partner, willing to make difficult decisions to maintain its integrity. However, the real test of these reforms lies in their durability. Would the NFL be able to maintain this new standard over the long term? Critics continue to watch closely, questioning whether the league's commitment to these changes is truly permanent or whether it might regress once the immediate crisis fades from public memory. The importance of maintaining these reforms cannot be overstated. The NFL's culture had been rooted in a tradition of toughness and hyper-competitiveness, which, at times, contributed to a mentality that condoned or ignored off-field misbehavior. Changing that deeply ingrained culture requires constant vigilance, not just from the league office, but from players, teams, and the broader football community. To ensure these reforms are long-lasting, the NFL will need to continue evolving. It must consistently update its policies, keep players educated, and remain proactive in addressing new challenges that arise. As new generations of athletes join the league, it will be crucial for the NFL to instill in them the importance of ethical behavior, both on and off the field. The league must remain committed to fostering an environment where accountability is the norm and where players are encouraged to lead by example. In the end, the reforms sparked by the Darren Sharper scandal represent more than just a response to a moment of crisis. They are the foundation of a new chapter for the NFL. One where integrity, responsibility, and transparency are at the core of the league's identity. While it remains to be seen how successful these changes will be in the decades to come, one thing is certain: the NFL has taken its first major steps toward a more responsible and accountable future, setting a new standard for how professional sports leagues can confront and overcome their darkest moments. It's hard to imagine how the NFL could ever be the same after everything that's unfolded, and as we explore how these events have shaped the league, it becomes clear that understanding the impact of these changes is crucial. The way the NFL has evolved and responded shows just how important accountability is, so stick around, hit that like button, and let's keep following these stories together. The league's transformation is still unfolding, and staying engaged will only help us see what's next. The real test lies in whether the NFL can maintain this progress, or if we'll see history repeat itself. Only time will tell.